So hi everyone, my name is Amir Shevat. Today we're going to talk about how to build communities and my experience at Slack, Google, Twitch, and Microsoft. Again, I'm Amir. I do product and co-founded a company called Reshuffle. It's reshuffle.com, and you can see it. It's a platform for developers in enterprise to build workflows and integrate systems within their company. I started with a few startups and then joined Microsoft to work with developers on Windows Mobile and SharePoint, if you remember those technologies. Then moved to Google. At Google, I managed. I started by being developer relations in Google Israel. Then created the startup program for Google and the Launchpad it's called the Launchpad, and the Experts program, the ambassador program called Google Developer Experts. At the end of my time at Google, I manage all of Google scalable developer programs around the world. Google developer groups, women in technology, my team manage all of that. And then I joined a small startup called Slack. At Slack, I started as DevRel number 1. We were 2 months before launching the platform. We had 50 developers ready to launch with us. And 2.5 years later, we had 250,000 developers and 250,000 active developers on a weekly basis, and a lot of engagement. And the company grew from 90 people when I joined to about 2,000 when I left. And if you don't know the difference between correlation and causation, you would say that I choose companies based on their logos. But now I'm going to break that pattern for you. Then I joined Twitch, and I was at Amazon, and I was the VP of platform. So my team was responsible for the APIs, building the platform, and integrating with games from Riot, Blizzard, and all these awesome developers that were building games that were streamed on our platform. I also written 2 books. One of them is on designing bots, how to write conversational interfaces from Alexa to Slack bots and Messenger bots, and designing web APIs, building APIs that developers love. So at Reshuffle, we want to build a community of developers. We're actually targeting enterprise developers, but our mission is to make developers' life simpler, more pleasant, and more productive, and building workflows that will make their life better. So let's start with why build a developer ecosystem. Why would you need a developer community? And the first thing is you need to make sure that you actually do need a developer community. For most companies, you actually don't need a developer community. A lot of startups are building APIs and think that they'll have a thriving community around them, and they might not, and they might not even need a developer community. They might need to tap into someone else's developer community. You need a developer community when there's a strong affinity between what you're building and ability of developers to make your product better. I'll give you an example. At Slack, we started without a developer community. We had an API, and then we decided to build our own integrations. We built our first 60 integrations with tools and services like Jira and Asana and GitHub and all of these awesome tools. We decided to build it ourselves, the integrations ourselves. But as time passed, we found out that we can't really build all the integration to thousands and thousands of tools and services out there. And developers told us that they want to use more, and they want a platform to be able to be successful, integrating things and making their life better. So we actually opened our API and decided to double down on a community and platform after trying another path, being successful for a while, and then seeing that the traction justified a community. Okay, so now that and just to finish that point, you want to have a community where there's extreme value in the community that is brought to your company. If there's for Android, for example, an app phone would not be very useful without a set of apps, and they need to be localized, and you need millions of apps in order to accommodate everyone who's using an Android or an iOS. So that's why developer community is super important for them. For Twilio, it's super important, the developer community, because it's actually the customers of the API. So you need to make sure that you're building an API and a developer community for the right reasons. Okay, so now that you've decided that you really need a developer community, how do you reach those people? So at Slack, we had these 4 groups of developer relations proficiencies. We had an advocacy. And advocacy is one-to-many. This is a person who sits and does scalable things, speaking in events, going and creating content, tutorials, everything that creating videos. At Google, we had a lot of online videos that we've created. All this is done by the advocacy team. Every activity that is one-to-many. Then you have the partnership engineering team. This is the one-to-few engagement. This is we had a person working with Salesforce to integrate Slack with Salesforce. His job was to work most of the year just on that single engagement. So that's the one-to-few. You want higher touch with several developers that really create an impact for the rest of the community. Enterprise architects, sometimes called like success engineers, these were people that were working with our clients to see that they're using the APIs in the right way. Here, it was really tied into money, because these were high-paying customers, which we wanted to really help integrate into Slack. And then we had content writers. That's actually a super important aspect of community engagement. The first thing developers do when they reach your product is to try to read the tutorial, try to understand what the product does. Content writers are the ones doing everything from writing the manuals to helping with the docs, with tutorial on parameters, or how to do X with Y with your API. Super important. I would test content writers with the ability of developers to solve problems and to get to 5 minutes to hello world from landing on your website all the way to experiencing success. This is the model I have for developer relations. This is basically the profession of developer relations as I see it, and it encapsulates the community outreach here. So the first thing you need to do is inspire developers about why they should use your platform or API. What's in it for them? Why is it important for them to use your API rather than another API? And how can they be successful using your API? This is more of like the building the why, what's in it for me, and the marketing. Then you have an education aspect. How can I use the API in an easy way? Here you bring the tutorials. Here you bring the 101s. Here you bring the things like the video that shows you how to get from zero to hero using our API. Then you have the enable section. The enable section is all about the tools and services that developers need in order to be successful on your platform. If you have an integration with an IDE, if you have a debugger, at Slack we built a way to format messages. So you put in a JSON and you get how the message is formatted in Slack. So developers could easily create delightful messages using our API. That falls under the enablement section. These are all the tools and services that your developer will need. And then the most important, but usually least used in developer relations, that's sad because I think this is where the value comes to the product team, is to provide feedback back to the product team and to the engineering team in your company. So when developers are using your API, they usually have feedback, bugs, feature requests, things that don't work exactly as they would expect them to do. It is your mission as developer relations to take those community feedback and put them back into the loop of the product design, so that your community has a better ability to impact the product itself. Okay, this is an interesting way where you look at the developer community from a funnel perspective. You map the steps that each of your community member actually needs to go through to be successful on your platform, and then you create all the metrics that are associated with this step of the funnel. So this is a traditional funnel. This is a Slack example. You start from interested, then you move to developer actually building on your platform. Then you have published. They publish the app on iOS, on Android, on the Slack platform. Then that app is being used. And then potentially that developer is actually monetizing, making money out of your platform. Now you need to build two things. You need to build the measurements for each of those steps. So for interested, it will probably be landing on my developer site. Building would be creating my first app. Publishing would be publishing that app. So these are the steps and metrics for each of the steps. The second thing you need to do is write the activities that you would take in order to move people through the funnel. So interested could be, I would run a Facebook campaign and get people into my funnel. Build will be, I'll have a hackathon and get people to build on my platform, and so on and so forth. And now we need to check the activities that you've done through the metrics. So I run a campaign, an ad campaign, and I got 10,000 new users interested in my platform. That was a good outcome. So that's basically how you look at the funnel. Okay, so now we're going to look at specific community activities and how they vary and what were their outcomes based on different use cases. So I've run communities at Microsoft, at Google, at Slack. There were very different types of engagements tied into what I was trying to measure in each of those activities. So let's get started. The first one was Microsoft. Our community engagement at the time was called roundtables. The idea was to bring highly curated teams of C-level executives and talk to them and create a community of C-levels that want to use the Microsoft technology. They actually had to pay to get into that community, and they had to pay a lot. So you need to have a certain license above a certain threshold of buying from Microsoft in order to be able to be invited into the community. It was highly curated and it was high touch. The speakers in each of the events of the communities got paid. They were usually a full-time employee of Microsoft. It was very ROI driven. So every time we wanted to see if a session was successful or not, we measured how many people actually bought the product that we were talking about. So everything was extremely measured. So it was high touch and high scale. This is my learnings. You can run a high quality, high touch and scalable community outreach, but it's very expensive. And you need to tie it into actually a metric that is impacted by money, because you're going to be measured on money out and money in. If the engagement that you're doing is creating monetary benefit for your company, this might make sense. And if you can actually measure the community actions that you're taking with dollars coming into the company. The second use case is the Google Developer Group. Here we created a scalable community that was very open and unmanaged almost. If in the Microsoft team, every community engagement had about 10 people per event who are full-time employees, with the Google Developer Group at the global level, we had 3 people managing the Google Developer Group. which was amazing because our developer group was crazy big all around the world. We had more than 750 groups that were meeting on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis around the world, teaching other people Google technologies. The key here was that it was scalable because it was open. We had community leaders from the community creating these groups and helping curate the content, get people into the events, curating the speakers. All of that was done by volunteers around the world. But so it sounds like a much better deal than the Microsoft deal, right? Why do you have to pay so much for managing a community if you can have a volunteer-led scalable program? But the problem was the cookie eaters. The problem is that when you don't control the content of the community and you don't control the quality of each of the events, you actually don't control the quality of the members of the community. And some of our community members actually flagged that certain big communities of developers for Google were not very useful for them. And I actually flew in to meet some of these community members. And what I ran into is the cookie eater problem. You go into one of the events and you meet someone and you say, hey, I'm so glad you're a developer for Google. And they say, oh, no, I'm not actually a developer for Google. And then you say, okay, why are you here? And their answer is usually, oh, there's great food here, and I meet other people who like Google, and I like Google. I Google all the time. And then you start understanding that the community has been diluted and the content has been diluted. And then developers don't feel that they are in with their peers and they don't get the value. So the thing that we've done to get rid of the cookie monster for the cookie eaters is to up the level of the content. So we mandated that every session would be very technical. Those cookie eaters got bored and left. And then developers felt that they belong in that community again. So my learnings is that you can do a high touch, high scale program, and it's less expensive, but you get mixed quality, and you need to make sure that the quality is an ongoing thing. It's really good for awareness. So every time Google launches a new API, the Google developer community is amazing and fantastic, and they really contribute to educating other developers, but you don't control the content. You can suggest the content, but these are volunteers and these are community members. They could choose to do anything on any product, and be aware of the cookie monsters. The last community that I'm going to talk about is actually the first year at Slack. We didn't have money to run a community management. We didn't have the headcount. We didn't have the funds to do the events all around the world. So we decided not to do a community effort, but to hack into other people's community. What we did is we went into our partners. We went to IBM, we went to AWS, we went to Google, and we said, hey, we're Slack, we're a small startup, but we're kind of sexy, so why don't we do an event together? Why don't we do a podcast together with you? And surprisingly, they said yes. So IBM ran a set of sessions to their community talking about the Slack platform. And the same thing for AWS. We had a session with AWS about how to build Slack bots on AWS. So hacking into a community proved to be an amazing strategy when you don't have the funds to hack into to build your own community. You might start with a small community, but then outreach to other communities in order to hack and bring more people into your community. So my learnings here is that you could run a high quality, high touch and scalable community, but you don't have to. And you can hack into other people's community, but you need to be sexy. If we were to come with no name, it would have been much harder for us to hack into other people's community. But just going into a developer community and talking to developers, that's another great way to start an engagement with a third-party developer community. Okay, Last point, I'm going to take another 5 minutes, is measuring the right thing in developer communities. These are things this is how we looked at Slack. So we didn't like developer engaged because nobody really cares in the company other than the community manager. Nobody really cares about how many developers were engaged. It's an internal metric. Then there's developer registered. How many people landed and registered on your developer site? And this is important if you're an API company, but if you're not an API company, again, it's not very important to other people, and it's also very easily hackable. And then there's revenue to the company, which is indirect. At Microsoft, the developer relations was actually moved into a revenue revenue-driven targets, and they all became salespeople. I left when that happened because I didn't want to become a salesperson. Once you give developer relations, once the community engagement is all around money, then it's harder to create a good community. So we had two metrics. One of them is number of developers with weekly active tokens, and the other one is how many of our paying customers were actually using the platform to be successful. Okay, so lessons learned. You need to work on breadth and depth. You need to build a place where you engage developers at large, but also have an organization that talks to the top developers in order to create quality, awesome integrations with them. You need to focus on the value to developers and partners. Make sure that you're measuring the right thing and aligning your activities to those measurements. So build your funnel, build your activities for each step of the funnel and measure it. Advocacy. Be an advocate and not an evangelist. So when you talk to developers, don't tell them, hey, this is, praise the Lord, here's our API. Tell them, here's our API. It might be a little broken, but we'll work together to create an amazing API. So be a member of the community in order to manage a community. Where your org lies is important. So I was in developer relations under product, under sales, and under engineering. I think that the best place to be is under product because of that feedback loop. Because the community can bring feedback that is important to product, then I think that's the best place for the community, the developer community, to be under. Money is important. Make sure that you justify your money and that your money comes from the right place that is aligned to your targets. And then always think about what's in it for me, for your fellow developer. That's it. Last point, I think the future of developer engagement is in streaming. We've done a few experiments when I was at Twitch. This is something that we've done with Stripe. I know the Microsoft Visual Studio channel on Twitch is blowing up, and there's a great community engagement there. So I think we're moving from online, from events and a one-to-many broadcast into community engagement that is engaged with people in chat, asking questions, and a much more collaborative way to engage with the community. Okay, so with that, I'm exactly on time, +10. And now I can go back here and stop sharing. Now, do I have time for questions? Thank you. Jacob, do I have time for questions? One question. Okay, I see a question here. When do you say measure the right thing? What can you give us as an example? Does it tightly depend with the company goals? So yes, I think measuring the right thing. There's two aspects here. The first one is build the right funnel. Developers are interested. Developers are engaged. Developers are using the API. Developers are successful with this API. Each step of this funnel needs to be specifically for your developer journey. And then you need to, thank you, Mercy, by the way, for the question. Then you need to actually measure for each step, what are the activities that you're taking and what are the measurements. So we talked about measurements. Interested is landing on the dev site. The second thing is measuring things that are connected to the end, to what's important to your company. So if the thing that is important to your company right now is revenue, so you need to prove to the company, how do you tie the activities that you're doing with the community to the outcome of the revenue? It doesn't need to be measured on revenue, but it needs to be measured on like people joining the community. I'm getting more awareness. We are getting better brand recognition, and then enterprise buy our product more. That's a great way to tie the measurements to the right thing, but it needs to be tied into something that is important to your organization as a whole. So if you're under the product organization, for us at Google, it was all about feedback. Okay. So I've put my my Twitter handle. I'd be happy to answer any other questions that you have there. I think Jacob is going to kick me very soon if I don't shut up. So you're all awesome, and thank you very much.